All right. Well, oh my goodness. I have four first timers on healthcare unfiltered today for a very important topic, and I have another that keeps popping up every so often on healthcare unfiltered, a recurrent guest that we all love and cherish. Today's podcast is about international medical graduates, in general, broadly, and in hematology and oncology specifically. So personally, I'm an international medical graduate, and everybody on today's show is an international medical graduate. We're going to try to do some introductions, try to understand, are there really struggles? Is there real perceptions? What are these struggles? And really dissect a recent paper that was written and by one of my guests. Okay, well, thanks everybody. We're going to do a round of introductions here, and we're going to start by the oldest person on this podcast, excluding me, which will be Dr. Tony Schwery. Tony, a little bit about you, and maybe when did you come to the U.S.? We'll go over your journey a little bit in more detail, but just briefly for now.
So I'm the oldest guy. It's a great way to to start. No, thank you, Shadi, for hosting us, today and highlighting some of our parts of our journey here. So I was born in Beirut, Lebanon, and actually did my training there, meaning my medical school. And when we say international medical grad, or foreign medical grad, although no one should use the word FMGs except in government document because they're usually 30, 50 years behind. It's where you did your medical school. It's not college, it's not this. So you could have done everything, college, everything, let's say in Russia, came to the US and did your medical school at the University of Rochester, and when did your residency and fellowship somewhere else, but went back, you're not an international medical grad. Okay, just to be careful, who did put those rules and this? No one knows. So I did my medical school in Beirut. I went to a French Jesuit university. And after that, I decided to come to the US. So I applied for residency and later on fellowship, and Cleveland was what I call my American birth. So I'm a Clevelander. And after that, for family reason, for opportunity reason, and many things, I end up moving to Boston after my fellowship. So I came to the US in 1000 or 1001, 2007, I moved to Boston. And since that time, I've been in Boston at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, where I'm GU oncologist.
Tony, thank you. It's truly a pleasure to be with you. We're not going to talk a lot about your academics, but I think everybody who's listening really understands what you have brought to the field of GU oncology. So it's always a pleasure to have you on. Let's move to Tarek.
Yes. Hi, my name is Tarek Hakel. I'm a third-year hematology oncology fellow currently at Duke. Like everyone here, I'm born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon. I completed medical school in the Lebanese University, which is the government school in Lebanon. And then, as all IMGs, we always end up having a gap year if you wanted to match straight from med school. So I did it as a prelim internal medicine resident at the American University of Beirut, and then matched at Hurley Medical Center, which is one of the community hospitals for Michigan State University, and then now matched at Duke for fellowship training. I am a proud IMG as everyone here on the podcast.
Tarek, when did you come here? When did you finish your medical school?
So I graduated summer of 2016. Okay. I came to the US summer of 2017.
Great. Nazli.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nazli Dizman. I am originally from Turkey. I have a little bit of a longer story. I went to medical school in Turkey, and I did residency in Turkey. And in my chief year, I was able to come to the United States. So I came to the United States in 2016. I was in LA at that time working with Dr. Paul for around 3 years, and I matched at Yale. Now I'm a PGY3 in internal medicine residency program at Yale.
That's wonderful. Ziad.
Hey everyone. So my name is Ziad. I was born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon, did medical school there, went to the same school as Tony, so did a 7-year curriculum in the sort of French model, which essentially includes the equivalent of undergrad. Then in 2018, when I graduated, I moved to the US and started working with Tony Shueri at Dana-Farber, as well as other folks, Ellie Van Ellen and Srini Viswanathan on JCO Oncology and computational genomics. And then in 2021, I started residency in internal medicine. So I'm in my 2nd year, and I'm currently applying for Hem-Onc fellowship. So yeah, pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Ayesha. And correct me if I'm not saying your name properly.
No, you're right. So hey everyone, I'm Ayesha. I'm from Pakistan. I'm also an international medical graduate. So I did my med school at Aga Khan University in Karachi. I'm originally from Islamabad in Pakistan, and I came here for my electives at Yale back in 2019. And then I was like, okay, I want to work here. So I came back once I graduated med school in 2021 for my postdoc in hematology at Yale with Dr. Alfred Lee, and I'm applying for internal medicine residency right now.
Great. So, I want to start, Ayesha, we're going to get to your paper because it's very provocative, but I really want to start by asking a simple question, which is everybody who has come to the US had to go to the US embassy in your home country and apply for a visa. Was that difficult for you, Nazli? I mean, was it like just you walk in and they just give it to you? Or do they get 20%, 30%? It's hard to believe 100%, no?
I think it was not easy. The visa process requires us to get documentation from our workplace, where we were born, and all other different stuff. And it involves an interview, and then they give you the visa. The visa, applying to the visa and getting it is not a problem, but to be able to get that work visa, you have to find a position in the United States. Someone needs to sponsor you. And it also is impacted by the factors in your home country. For example, the year that I applied to the visa, actually, the night that I had sent my documentations to City of Hope, we had a coup attempt in Turkey. So the first person I emailed was Dr. Paul after I called my family when I was in Istanbul. I told him that there is just like some turmoil. FYI, I sent my documents. So it's not just a visa situation. I think there are like several other things that contribute to the hardship.
Ziad, in Lebanon, I mean, it was recent for you, like just 4 or 5 years ago. Applying to a visa, is it a student visa, work visa? Was it easy, difficult?
Yeah, I mean, I came on a work visa. Similar to what Nazli was describing, was sort of need to be sponsored for a job. At the time was a research position. It was, it was difficult in the sense that there were documents that needed to be provided. There was a lot of back and forth done. It was you need to provide a lot of documentation, etc. And there's a turnaround time mostly to get an appointment. So we started planning like, I don't know, 6 months in advance, maybe 7 months in advance to get it on time. So it takes some planning, takes some documentation, and I would say definitely not a seamless process, but it was I would say one of many obstacles along the way.
But Tariq, one issue is the process. You just have to do paperwork, and it doesn't matter. It could take 2 months. You do the paperwork, and they just stamp it. The other issue is you do the paperwork, and they still have a quota. They say we're going to only let 50% of people from Beirut come in to the US. Is there such a thing? Like, is there, or is it just if you have the paperwork, it's a slam dunk?
So for me, I applied for a J1 visa, which is an exchange student visa, meaning it's easily sponsored between, you know, like the institution that you get into will open a sponsorship for you through the ECFMG. And it's not as difficult as, for example, the H1B that, you know, others have taken. So for J1, it tends to be a bit easier to get, and it's kind of straightforward with no quota. I think the quota applies to H1B that is sometimes non-institutional, so it's a lottery, and like there's a certain number of visas that they take per year. So for me, yeah, but you know, with J1, obviously, there's a lot of pros, but also a lot of cons, like meaning, you know, you have to go back to your country once you finish whatever research or training you were destined to come here to do. And that's a whole other process when you want to stay in the country. Like you have to get into a waiver process, whether it's a job that sponsors that waiver, whether you have other conditions like that allows you to apply for a waiver. So while it is an easier visa to get in general with no quota or anything like that, it definitely has a lot of restrictions attached to it as compared to, for example, the work visa that can be harder to get, but has more leeway for you to be able to stay here easier and sponsor yourself into other, into a green card or something that allows you to work here more long term.
Tony, I don't know, how was it back in when you applied? Because when I applied, which was a little bit before you, one of the most important thing for the American consulate was they wanted to make sure that whoever they grant the visa to eventually comes back to their home country. So it was a judgment call. Obviously, they realized that I'm sure they have stats and data that not everybody comes back. But there was, you know, one routine question the counselor or the interviewer would ask you, are you planning on coming back? When you applied, was there such a thing?
I have to tell you, I mean, it's over 21, 22 years. I personally, you know, I had the interview. I don't, you know, totally remember. I came on an H1, which ended up being, you know, good, and not every hospital give that. But you know, I think there was a lot of questions that, you know, how is it? What are you doing, etc. Luckily, my university was one that, you know, would be recognized if we go through the right, you know, right exams and the long process. And that's something we can talk about, but because we would have our own exams, you know, the French system, etc. And we had to study for the American exam at the same time. And in my case, I don't know the case of others, I had to travel for one of them to the US to do the exam, the expenses, the things. I think I would say it's at least for international medical grad, the process of selection is probably way more than the American medical grad. Because, you know, you have that option. You can get selected and filtered. So you end up having a task force, and currently, at least with the oncologist, there's around, Ayesha knows all those numbers better than me, 30 to 40% of all practicing oncologists happen to be international medical grad. You know, the selection process is way more because there's so many steps. So you end up really with people that one didn't give up, one very resilient, a group of people that through the process get asked or ask themselves, not asked, do you want to really come? Do you want to really come? Do you want to come? And if they end up, that means they went through 10 different times between themselves and others that they really want to come. So it's really a different selection process. You know, to answer you again, I think the people that interview us at the embassy want to first make sure that no security issue, because many of us come not, you know, from countries where war, civil war, violence, Nazli mentioned a coup. Well, this was the first coup since maybe the Ataturk. We have a coup in it's very common other places. So, you know, and I don't blame them. You don't want to, I mean, this is the right process to go through, but it brings me back, you know, when you come here, it just, we've been through a different experience. You hear about the coup in the US. I think probably since the Civil War, there wasn't really any, and up until January 6th, there was
Let's not go over January 6th here. Okay, this is not a
I'm just
political
saying
show.
there was nothing, but that was a reality. There was really nothing in internal conflict
Right.
that is hard, where outside it's probably the opposite.
So, Ayesha, I mean, something sparked your interest. You decided to do a survey or a paper or something. Just take me through what made you do this. Did you have a personal experience? Did something happen? A friend, colleague, yourself? I mean, something like this, at least in my experience, certain situations trigger it. So tell me what made you decide to do this investigation.
Yeah, so being an international medical graduate myself, yes, I have experienced the bias. Maybe because I'm so early on in my career, lesser than other people. But so it was an aspect of that, and then an aspect of general diversity, equity, inclusion research. Like my mentor was very involved in DEI research. And during our discussions, we had a discussion about IMGs and where they stand in relation to DEI, and where we are trying to promote underrepresented minorities, which is excellent. There is a lot of bias against IMGs too in the recruitment process, and we had all felt that, but we did not have any concrete data. So that's how this came about, and we were like, we are going to survey all the program directors of hematology oncology, both adult and pediatric, in the United States. And when we are asking them the typical DEI questions about their initiatives and their perceptions and about underrepresented minorities, we are going to ask them about IMGs as well and what their perceptions are. And that's how the study came about. And at the end of the survey, when we did all our data analysis, the findings for the IMGs were much more stark than any other group. And that's how this paper came about, because the perceptions against IMGs, or like generally a perception of disadvantage, was so strong that it overshadowed everything else.
Ayesha, when you mentioned that you experienced bias, are you able to share with listeners a story, two story? Like, what do you mean by that?
So personally, I feel like I have been very, very lucky, because my first exposure to the US healthcare system was during my electives, which I did at Yale, and then postdoc I continued in the same place. And generally the program over here and my mentor, Dr. Lee, like, it has been amazing. So my experience has been so good compared to a lot of my friends and what I've heard. Now that I'm in the application process for internal medicine, that's when you see a lot of places, they'll clearly tell you that we will not even consider applications from international graduates. And it's just, they'll never even see your application. It doesn't matter all the hard work that you put in all over the years, because it's just going to be filtered out. So during that process, and a lot of things that I had heard from friends and from people who had already graduated ahead of me in med school, that has been like, I've experienced it throughout.
Ziad, have you took a different path. You actually did research first, and then you did residency. It's a little bit hard for a listener. Let's say I have a listener, they're not going to understand that you had a bias and then you matched at Harvard, right? I mean, you can understand that somebody who's listening to this is saying, okay, well, I mean, they're telling me there's a bias, but this guy is at Harvard. So how can you describe something, a story or something, to illustrate to somebody who's listening what you've experienced that could bring it home to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been, I think it's what I've been able to get to is I think through a combination of a lot of good mentorship and a lot of an amazingly supportive environment, with obviously quite a bit of hard work. I do think that sort of a number of things needed to line up for me to be able to sort of do well in sort of respect. But that, I think, for me, I felt like there were a number of structural barriers that I had to get through to be able to get into residency, wherever that may be, to begin with. And I think these structural barriers, we alluded to the first one, which is visas. And I will say it's not only sort of the fact of getting a visa to come, but also all the associated structural barriers when applying for residency. There are a number of residencies who do not want any people on any sort of visas. Other residency programs who want certain types of visas, and then you have to navigate this entire process and sort of go scouring through hundreds of websites to figure that out when you're applying. That initially, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That initially sort of limits what you're able to apply to, and then so I had to navigate that. I was on a particular visa at the time. I applied on an H-1B visa, and so that sort of limited things. I was going through the process of applying for a green card that had not been settled by the time I applied. So that was one consideration. The other considerations are, as Ayesha was pointing out, there are a number of programs who flat out would not consider IMGs whatsoever, and so that sort of limits your scope even further, regardless of visa issues. And then you go into the third problem, which is really standing out, because there are a lot of applications from everywhere, and there's a lot of sort of I would say prestige signaling that goes on in these applications and filtering, and sort of I think that is a third barrier. And so I think all these structural barriers make it incredibly difficult to do well. I feel like, again, for me, it was through a combination of a million factors, including extremely helpful mentorship, hard work, that I was able to achieve that, and then trying to tick all the boxes that are required to do well in the match. But I will say it's not for a lack of barriers and lack of difficulties. I'm sure that all applicants, whether locals or internationals, have their own stories, but I do feel, as has been pointed out before, that just the amount of extra barriers and the amount of extra hoops that we go through as IMGs make us more battle-hardened than we're. Maybe that makes us stronger on the other end, but it's definitely something else.
I want to have Tony comment, but before Tony comment, just because Tony, I'm saving you to have a question for Nazli, and then I wanted to comment. One of the things, Nazli, that struck me as I listened to you is the long journey, and that's probably what Ziad also alluded to. In other words, if you are not an IMG, you probably didn't need to spend 3 years at City of Hope, and maybe you wanted to, but maybe part of it because you thought it will improve your opportunity to get a residency or whatever it is, and a non-IMG doesn't need to do that. So do you feel that the journey is always longer for IMG? Because that would be a perfect segue to hear from Tony after you comment on that.
Yeah, I think the majority of the IMGs would do a research year or 2 or 3 years before residency. I do believe that most of them really enjoy it. I think most of the IMGs coming to the United States are attracted by the research opportunities. Although it doesn't change the fact that the journey may be a little bit longer. In my case, if I was born in the United States, I wouldn't have probably done residency twice, but I would have probably done research.
Tony, what are your thoughts? You heard from, and I'm going to go to Tariq after that.
Yeah, I mean, experience is the first thing that people, IMGs coming worry about is the visa, knowing that there are IMGs that are, Americans. So you could, be an Irish American born here, etc., and suddenly you have this affinity to go back to Cork or this and do your medical school there because your grandparent lived there and come back. You're an IMG. And maybe you're born your parents were physicians here, born in the US, but go back to your country and want to come back. You're an IMG, but American. But for the majority of IMG, they don't have US citizenship or green card. The visa goes hand in hand with the place to match the residency. The problem is, I would say, my own experience, the vast majority of the hospital don't know how to handle the visas. They think they know, but actually they do not. Why is that? Today I was on a search committee. I can't tell more. I asked a question, big search committee, do you accept international applicant? Everybody was, funny enough, the two people were IMGs. And they're like, what? Well, we have, what? And they looked at the medical school bylaw. They do accept, but I said international. I didn't say, but there is no understanding. So in my experience, when you follow from A to Z the thing, usually there is a department or a division in the hospital. It's under HR, where there is one person, rarely two, that handle the visa. This person usually is a paralegal, not a lawyer, and you are at their mercy. Luckily, in my situation, if I remember all of them, everyone was perfect and amazing. But you never know. Your life is at their mercy. You don't know if this person is competent or not, lazy or not, good or not. And I'm going to use words that, but this is the reality. And even if you're the head of the hospital, you are at the mercy of this person because you don't understand anything about this. Your first passport maybe was at age 25 when you travel. You don't. So luckily, I've been in good places, but I have had, talking to other experiences, where the people were deciding that person whether this applicant should come on J1 or H1, or what is the quota should be, who should be the accept, etc. Because the decision makers on who to take, the physicians, this program directors, that had no idea what a visa is. You know what I mean? And fair enough, when some of them travel different countries, they don't know what visa is. So it's a huge discordance, and you have to advocate for yourself. So I would love to see what other things, Shadi. I'm not taking over.
No. That's actually,
but that's a very important thing people don't talk about.
That is very perfect, and that is something I want to ask Tariq and Ayesha on the visa piece. I really want to hone into this. A lot of Americans don't understand this, and Tariq alluded to this a little bit earlier about the J1 and the H1. And Tariq, maybe you can explain the difference. But what really bothers me is if you have a J1 visa and you are in residency and you decide to go visit family anywhere, you have to go back to the embassy and apply again. And there's a sense of fear that you may not get that visa again and your entire future is up in the air. Take us through that process of what you go through visa-wise, because I bet you many folks don't understand even the anxiety level that you have to go through.
That's very true. I remember, when I came here, my residency coordinator was really good, and she used to tell me, don't go to Lebanon in the last 2 months of your visa, because if you don't get your visa renewed, we still want you to come back. And so if you have less than 2 months on your J1 and it's about to expire, the admitting immigration officer can deny your entry. And it is very anxiety provoking. I remember, I promised myself when I came to here that I wouldn't let 1 year go by without going home and visit. And I knew all about the J1 restrictions and problems because it's a yearly renewal. So J1 renews with your contract. And when you only get your offer letter for being promoted, like say from PGY1 to PGY2, that's when you can reapply for another, they call it DS 2019, which is the document that allows you to reapply for your renewal of the stamp, the visa stamp, so that you can actually come back. So when you get the offer letter, which is about December of your academic year, then you apply for your DS 2019 renewal, which takes about 2 months. And then you're like close to February, and then you're still like not sure. So I used to apply for the visa appointment way before so that I can get the earliest visa appointment by the time I get to Lebanon, so that I can guarantee that I can actually get the passport back by the time I'm actually going back to the US. Because also there, you know, you have to go to the embassy and then get the stamp and then wait for your passport to come so that you can actually go back. So I did that for 2 years, but then COVID happened, and then third year of residency through third year of fellowship. So I'm getting close to 4 years that I haven't been back home, and I couldn't even get married. I couldn't do anything. And so I had to get married here. I had to have my first child here. And I couldn't go back home at all, partly because of COVID and the uncertainty of, you know, visa appointments, embassies were closed, airports were shutting down. I couldn't risk my career. And another part was, I don't know if people recall, but at the time the president decided to ban certain visas. And so for people that were in the US, we were fine and we were able to renew our stay. But for folks that were overseas or that decided to go during that time, the embassies were not even stamping any type of visas. And so for these reasons, I worked really hard to get to where I am today, and I just could not jeopardize it. Luckily, I didn't have real emergencies that would warrant me to go, but it was very stressful and scary for years. Yeah.
That's amazing. Ayesha, give me maybe the top 2 findings of your paper. Let's discuss, you know, number 1 and number 2. And were you surprised by these findings?
Yeah, we were surprised in a way. So we asked program directors about their perceptions of different applicant groups and who they consider to be advantaged and disadvantaged. And they were rating it on a scale of like 1 to 5 about how advantaged in the recruitment process for fellowship different applicant groups are. And we included all ethnic groups or races and underrepresented minorities, and we included IMGs and also age over 40. And when we finally analyzed the results, IMGs, non-US citizen IMGs, were the most viewed as the most disadvantaged group. And they were more disadvantaged even when compared to historically underrepresented minorities. And they were more disadvantaged compared to every other group, and this was statistically significant. The second most disadvantaged group was applicants over age 40, and the third most disadvantaged were US citizen IMGs.
Ayesha, sorry to interrupt, but just so we could understand, when you say disadvantage, you mean they have less likely to be accepted, just to understand the definition?
Yes, yes. So this is the program director's perception of who will have the toughest time or the easiest time while applying for fellowships, hematology oncology fellowships. And this is both adult and pediatric hemonc PDs. So these were the 3 groups who were most disadvantaged, and this was more significant in academic programs versus community programs, which was expected. That the PDs of academic centers were viewing IMGs as more disadvantaged compared to PDs of community hospitals. And PDs of smaller programs were also viewing IMGs as more disadvantaged compared to larger programs. And small and large was less than 9 fellows a year to more than 9 fellows. Less than 9 fellows to more than 9 fellows, yeah.
Nazli, do these findings surprise you?
Statistical significance somehow surprised me. That actually really means that it is there. I mean, in the data of, I believe 50 program directors, like if I'm not wrong in the paper.
It's 73. It was a 40.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that surprises me in a way that I knew that, I expected that, but it still surprised me. I'm applying to fellowship this year, and there is a spreadsheet going around. Actually, we talked about this with Ziad before too. Everyone writes there whether they're an IMG, whether they're which program they are in, and how many programs they applied, and how many fellowship interview invites they got. And you can see that in that list too. If it is a non-US IMG,
So
They
how do
apply
you,
to 50 programs and then they get 2-3 interviews.
but
Unfortunately,
how do you
Not often.
account to academic accomplishment? I mean, Tony, you're in a position to, you know, again, as a professor and as a senior investigator, you know that there could be an IMG who's done 3 years of research, like, you know, a lot of folks here, like Nazli or Ziad, and have papers and applying. And then there's a non-IMG who has not done any research. Are we saying that the non-IMG always holds an advantage regardless of the academic accomplishments of an IMG? Are we able to, like, scientifically to say that based on Ayesha's findings?
You know, I mean, I did a lot of work and reading about this. I don't know deep down if the problem is ignorance, laziness, or what you said, it's a real discrimination. And I'll tell you why. But on one hand, I mean, yes, there is. The data is the data. What Ayesha did, that very few did in the past, is she provided the hardcore data. And hopefully, you know, as part of the IMG oncologists and other, you know, movement, we will continue to provide hardcore scientific, you know, data, not just opinion, expert opinion, what we feel. The one thing I discovered, which I still have to dig more into it, is training programs in the US. Many of them, not all of them, are T32. So these are NIH based, and Nazli did a lot of homework on that T32. So if you don't have at least a green card, permanent residency, or this, where are you gonna get the money from, right, to fund that person? Okay, so you could use that in a way to say, oh, my budget, if I'm a small program, doesn't allow me for 1 or 2 IMG. Okay, that's great. But to me, as a program director, that's an extremely lazy way, either lazy or lazy is the right term, to justify decreasing my pool of applicants. You know, it's very lazy. Well, okay, the healthcare system has so much money and so much expenditures that you should be able, through your, I don't know what insurance, what healthcare system you're on, if you're hospital X, to through fundraising, etc., or through going to, you know, to the system. We have a democratic system in this country, thankfully, knowing some of us don't come from a democratic system, to go and advocate to change this. Nobody even thought. It's like following, like herds. So if this is the problem, tell us. We'll go and change it. So we don't know what's the issue. I heard that 1 to 2 times only, but it's not it's a weak argument.
So let's try to get some data. So Ziad, in your program, how many residents are there at the Dana-Farber or the Brighams? How many total residents in John Madison?
So the categorical residents are about
Right.
40 years, so 120.
120.
Yeah.
What's the percent of IMGs of these 120?
Of the categoricals, I think there's about 1 or 2 a year
Wow.
of the
Wow.
categoricals.
Wow.
So about like total of about 5 maybe or 4.
Tariq, how about in your program?
I'm the only one in the fellowship. I mean, yeah. I mean,
But
in the residency, I'm not sure because I don't know the total number, but I also think they take 1 or 2 a year. Yeah.
The reason I ask, because these numbers obviously speak volume, but here's my other question. Do you know how many applied, right? I mean, it's fair to say, like I could tell you honestly, when I was applying way before your time, I didn't apply to anything in the Harvard system. I thought they'll laugh at me. I'm not gonna lie. So I mean, they still laugh at me right
Continue
now.
to laugh. Right?
No, I know, Tony. I knew what he's gonna say. See, immediately, right away. But the point is, like, you know, I think you want to know the denominator to be able to be very scientific about this. If you're the only one who applied and you got it, it's 100%. So do we know how many people applying? I mean, Ayesha, did you look at that, for example? Is there any data into how many folks apply to these programs, and then the percent acceptance, because that would be very important.
So I don't think we have it for individual institutions, but NRMP has a charting of outcomes every year where they show the number of applicants that applied to all residency positions in the US and the number who were accepted, and it usually varies somewhere around 50%. Like there's a 50% match rate for IMGs, plus or minus 2%.
How about
Right.
non-IMGs?
They're over 90% as far as I remember. I may be
Okay.
wrong, but they're around 90%.
But that's really important. I bring these numbers because I did not know these numbers, but that's very important. That what we're saying is IMGs have a 50% chance of getting residency in this country. Non-IMGs have over 90% chance of getting in this country, and that really illustrates the long road. I mean, Tony, I mean, these are the numbers: 50% over 90%. So put on your academic scientific hat. How would you try to investigate this? What Ayesha did is great, but it was a survey. So what would you do to take that to the next step?
Yeah, no, I look at the problem at any problem. You know, when you ask this, let's get out of IMG, let's talk society. You know, I'm a more big picture person. I look at a problem from two: rights and equity. That's one. Second, economy, very important. So if I'm interested in having the best country on earth, that's the United States. I hope the six of us on this agree. Otherwise, we wouldn't be coming here, because I strongly agree, you know, with the statement I made.
I still think Beirut is the best thing, but that's fine. Keep going.
Yeah, that's what you think. But is this, we want the education, and we want also the doctors to be the best. Great. This is the second. And if you want the doctors and the researchers to be the best, you have to cast the wider net. The denominator, it's so important, way more important than the numerator. And instead of that, you can't exclude IMG. You can't exclude women. You can't exclude minorities, because once you start excluding, so your denominator is becoming smaller. So your opportunity of finding the best in the best country goes significantly. Economic, maths, one-on-one. That's it's really has, and of course there is the equity, there is all that. But I'm just talking about, imagine, Shadi, if you want to live in the best, most affordable, everything, state in the US, and someone give you the choice of 4 states. What the heck, compared to the 50 states? It's a matter of casting a wide net. And again, if the problem is these are T32, we don't accept, that's very lazy. That's extremely lazy answer. Come to us, and we'll tell you why it's a lazy answer.
Why are we seeing this, in your opinion? Like, what is going on? I mean,
I think it's always been like this. So when a generation after another come, why to change? Change is very hard. I think the hardest thing, and that's why the US.
What do you want them to change?
No, I want them to think. Now, it's not about changing. I want people to take a deep breath, read Dr. Ayesha Butt article, and answer me why our denominator is small. Why are we not casting a wider net? That's all. Because I think this is a bit not only counterintuitive, this is a bit destructive. You're not serving American patients, and you're not serving, you know, your country well by being so exclusive. It's not good.
Nazli, why do you think that's happening?
That's a great question. I think there's several reasons that is happening in several different levels. They are all embedded in like different levels of the struggles that the IMGs go through. I would think that there is improvement, but I think what we lack is that the appreciation of the struggles that the IMGs go through, and the multilingual, multicultural experience that they could bring into the system. So I think we need to start embracing that more, and perhaps just unite as IMGs and AMGs to bring the best to the Americans, as Dr. Trey said, and it shouldn't be that challenging if we identify the main structural reasons causing this. We just need to, I guess, unite and think more.
So, Tariq, I don't want this to be IMGs versus non-IMGs, right? I mean, how can we actually take that out and just realize that this is about having the best physician possible to serve the patient? I mean, do we really care if all of us, we are going to be sick at some point? I mean, Tony is already sick with COVID. He would want the best doctor to treat him from COVID. That's why he called me, and I took care of him. But in general, do you really care where that person is from? How do we take that bias out?
Yeah, that's an important question. I think the biggest thing for IMGs is we are not viewed as a diversity. We're not, like, when we say diversity in the US, like, IMGs is not in that category, right? And so people can still freely, exclude IMGs without any retaliation or anything. It's just, the culture that we're talking about, right? The status quo, like the things that are not changing. Like, this institution takes only 1 or 2 IMGs a year, and that's gonna stay like that for 20 years. Or, for example, we know this program is IMG friendly because all the IMGs get accepted there, versus a program that is like locked, like, don't even waste money on applying there. So I guess part of it is the status quo that Dr. Shwayri said, like, we're not challenging that status quo. We just like, if you're an IMG and you get to where you want to be, you're never really going back and saying, oh, I need to fix or improve or change things for the better and allow for advocacy for IMGs and be more inclusive. I think, yeah, part of it is us too, like, as IMGs, like, we're not challenging the status quo. We're just keeping things be and moving on with our lives. And again, IMGs are not viewed as a diversity. And so that for programs, they can filter us out just with a click on a computer, and no one can see your application or know you even existed. And so I think it's,
you know what, this is, this is a very, very good point. I want to make sure you spend a couple of minutes on this. When you say click you out and filter you, some folks don't understand that process. Do you want to explain what that means? Because I totally agree that this is easily done, right?
Yeah. So, most matches in the US, whether for residencies or fellowships, they go through the ERAS, which is the platform that allows you to upload everything about yourself and submit it to whoever. Usually, I think 99% of residencies and fellowships use that same platform. And so in that platform, you specify your characteristics, like your medical school, when you're born, when you graduated, what type of visa you need, and stuff like that. And so I think programs receive those characteristics, and I don't know how it happens on the other side, but I do know that there are filters in place, and they can choose, I only want to see the AMGs that apply to this program. I want to see people that don't need visas that apply to this program. And so they can choose which applications to review, basically. And this has been heavily criticized. And I think what I've been seeing is that programs should not be allowed to do that. Like, they should be more holistic in their approach and try to at least give a fair shot to all applicants that have at least paid money and put efforts into applying. Although I know some programs have been getting thousands and thousands of applications, so it can be a bit cumbersome. But
I can tell you, I was a program director for HEMONC for 4 years, and I was told by my institution that they cannot sponsor a H1 visa and that they cannot do J1. I was literally told. So I filtered everybody who does not have a green card or
But Shadi, without interrupting you, I like when people ask, so why? So for example, if this is me and if I wasn't, I would ask why, and they'll say because we can. And then I would ask again why, and then they say because we can't. And I'm happy to ask it 500 times till at the end of the day, they'll say, I tell you why, because this person said it. Great. So you take it, walk, you go to that person, say, so why? And I bet you, I would bet you my iPhone, it's new, that it's someone down in the basement or in whatever floor thinking it's a bit hard, because it's hard. It's 1 form or 2 form for a J1, probably 10 form for an H1. It's at a couple of $100 for J1, couple of $1,000 for H1. But measure that to the healthcare in the US measured in billion or trillions, and it's extra work on someone who can take that decision, because you have to trust that someone who's handling those visas, because even the CEO of the hospital probably has no idea how this, come. I remember one of my former bosses, we wanted to recruit a very, very, prominent person from a different country, the most prominent, it was how, but then this person coming, my boss asked me, can we give them a green card? I mean, this is like a full professor of medicine, a socialite who understand things. Like I said, what? It's like, yeah, can we give them a green card? I'm like, can you give me $1 billion? Like, throwing, it tells you the level of not understanding this. But again, 2 issues. Your task force in oncology, 30-40% is IMG. Second, you're excluding 40% of people who can increase, your workforce very possibly to a better. I don't think that, because of the resilient thing we talked about, you're looking at the best of the best who decide to do this. So you're not serving, not yourself or your hospital. You're not serving your patient, therefore you're not serving your country well.
right.
And that is wrong.
Ayesha, another finding in your paper.
So just to continue what Dr. Choueiri was saying, as part of our paper, when we were looking at different studies, it actually showed that IMGs were more likely to serve in rural areas or underserved communities and more likely to take care of people of color. And there were studies, large studies, looking at the outcomes of patterns of care for IMGs. And there was a study that showed that they had excellent outcomes, even better in some cases to American MDs. So the point here is that if you're excluding this pool of applicants, you're hurting American patients at the end. You're hurting your own patients, and they're not getting the best providers that they could have gotten, especially people who are, especially people of color, people in underserved areas. You're at the end hurting society and patients in general. And one thing that's important to acknowledge, and I feel like a lot of people aren't aware of, is the magnitude of the contributions of IMGs to the physician workforce. Like overall, they're 1/4 of the physician workforce in the US. In Hem-Onc, they're 37% of all hematologists, oncologists. So this is not like a tiny minority we are talking about. They form a huge bulk of the physician workforce. So it's important to, yes, study their contributions or the outcomes, whether academic or clinical, so that you have the data to support your arguments, but to acknowledge and that, yes, IMGs are a part and an important part of the workforce. So you should not shy away from recruiting them in the first place. Because I feel like once people reach a certain stage in their careers or their faculty, they're more easily acknowledged, even if they're IMGs. But to get people to that stage, you have to give them a chance in the earlier stages of their career when they're applying for residency or for fellowship. So yes, that was one thing.
Ziad, do you want to reflect on what Ayesha said in terms of that findings and any surprises there? Any comments on that?
Yeah, I have to say, none of this seems surprising to me, just based on it sort of reflects my personal experience with throughout the process where we go through these and we're and echoing what Tarek said earlier, I do think that it's still socially accepted to show overt bias towards IMGs, and that's sometimes in writing, sometimes in verbal. It's sort of interviews where you will see sort of overt bias in a way that I don't think is socially accepted in most other contexts. And I think that is still normalized in many ways, saying things like celebrating, for instance, a low IMG percentage in a program as being some sort of positive outcome, or seeing it as a proxy for being a better program, even when you are there interviewing with that person. I have to say, I've been very fortunate. The environment I've been in, although sort of, as you mentioned, does not have the largest number of IMGs, I've never experienced that in this current environment, and I've been very fortunate in this environment to not experience this. But when I was sort of interviewing at other places, etc., I used to see that regularly and sort of advertised. And so I do see this bias reflected in my personal experience. I don't find it surprising. And just to go back to one other thing about the structural barriers and why I think there is this bias. Some of it is just personal bias, and I think that exists across the spectrum of sort of across the spectrum of sort of any sort of minority or any sort of group that is has unfavorable outcomes. But I think the other one that as a group, as IMGs and as people advocating for IMGs, spend time on is what are the structural barriers, and we've alluded to this multiple times. I think the biggest one is probably funding and funding restrictions for IMGs, and how that looks like is these T32 grants or whatever, and whether that's in the part of training or whether later in their career where you're required to have a certain sort of immigration status, meaning a green card or passport to be able to. I think that's a huge barrier, and I think that sort of trickles down to the other barriers, including the visas, etc. I think if we're going to make sort of headways, part of it is advocacy and changing minds, but it's also about changing structural barriers and tackling these huge structural barriers.
Ayesha, other findings in your paper?
Yes. So the main findings were regarding the perceptions, but one interesting thing that happened during the peer review process, and it probably ties into what Ziad was saying about how it's socially acceptable to kind of be a little biased against IMGs. So we had a line in there. It was based on literature review and based on NRMP data that IMG fellowship applicants were likely to have a higher mean number of papers and presentations. Like their mean number is 16 compared to 8 for US MDs. And we simply wrote that. We quoted NRMP data and we said IMGs are more academically productive at the time of fellowship application. And one of our reviewers was like, well, I don't agree with this. Maybe they're doing this out of desperation to stay in the US. So I don't like the word academically productive here. So we had to take out academically productive. And we were like, okay, NRMP says that IMG fellowship applicants have a mean number of this presentation. So
Wow.
it was like, even when you
that is really, really interesting. I want to talk, I want to have the most published one in this crew comment on that. Tony, what are your thoughts here?
That's borderline. I don't know what the right word. I would, Ayesha, and I know you that I would have gone to the, editor and voiced a complaint with this reviewer. I don't know, I don't want to say, but I would say if you ask 5 people, at least one would say that's racist. Sadly, it is. I mean, that's one of explanation of, I hope it's not, but that's unacceptable comment. I think it could be easily the fact that in order to get a residency, not in a small program or this, if you want to go like Ziad at the Brigham, Nazli at Yale, Tariq now at Duke, you probably need an edge in terms of research. So you came, you did 3-4 years of research. Of course, who does 3-4 years of research? You are lucky also. You have like Ziad, first author in Nature Com, Nazli, Nature Medicine, etc. Of course you can. It's not because you're IMG. I mean, I think the person that made that comment has probably a poor statistical judgment. It's just the nature of the thing rather than
But it
we are
goes
better.
it goes to the bias
It
Ayesha
goes
said, right?
exactly to the bias.
This
And it
is
hit
really,
this person
yeah, yeah.
that he may not, or she may not, or they may not be, you know,
This is
enough.
this
It
is
is
a
really
very,
sad. It's
yeah.
a very sad comment.
This is a very good example of bias that you mentioned. Tariq, you know, the one thing in my mind, and again, just being simplifying things, in order for me to buy that there is discrimination against IMGs, what you need to convince me is that the only reason somebody does not get picked into a program is because they are IMG. I think there are a lot of these variable factors. So if I'm interviewing you and interviewing Nazli, for example, you know, she's better and she's from the US than the IMG. I totally understand the descriptive analysis that Ayesha did, and I commend you for doing this. We're all IMGs, so I was very happy to see that there's somebody who's actually exploring this. What I'm struggling with is, can we conclusively know what's behind it? Now, the example you gave of the reviewer is very black and white in my view, right? This is very clear example. Are there other examples, Tariq, you can comment on where we can really, because I do think, I like what Tony said, we need to advocate, right? We need to have advocate. And as we advocate, we need to bring examples to people and say, look, this is what's actually going on. It's not just descriptive. It's happening, and we need to reverse this.
I mean, I guess numbers is the biggest thing you can rely on. I don't know if programs are willing to disclose how many, AMGs they get, applications from AMGs they get versus IMGs, and how many are selected for interviews from AMGs versus IMGs, and then how many get ranked, because even if you interview, it doesn't mean that you're going to rank them. I think numbers are the strongest data you have, because no one's going to tell you I do this or that, right? Like, no one's going to disclose that. But I think numbers are the biggest asset that we have. And exactly what Ayesha mentioned, like if 50% of IMGs match versus over 90 of AMGs, like how like if we're not really discriminating, it should be equal, right? Like, or close.
Yeah, right.
So I guess that's my takeaway.
I want to move to solutions in the last segment.
I'm sorry, Tariq and Shadi, but I think there could be discrimination in some way. Not just that. The comment that Ayesha made about that reviewer, remember, that reviewer made that comment. It's very bothersome, no doubt. And that reviewer knows that their identity will not be revealed. It's almost like those comments on CNN or like the Twitter, when you have people taking another and they know they can be there, like in a room, and that tells you exactly what this person thinks. So it could be they're right, but it certainly begs the question, they're discriminating.
Yeah.
So I think that's really eye-opening.
So I want to move. I think I want to, in the last segment, and I know we've been going for an hour, I want to go into solutions a little bit. Ayesha, in your paper, after you eloquently described the problem and the data, what are your proposed solutions to the problem, and what are the next steps?
So I feel like one of the important things is further research into this, both in terms of what is contributing to the bias, or why are why is there like a 50% match rate? Because the way you were saying that, is this a bias or are there other factors playing into it? Because we need to identify what's the reason behind this to move towards a solution. So more research into those reasons, then more awareness in general about the contributions of IMGs to the field, whether it's heme-onc or in medicine in general. Because I feel like a lot of people at a lot of very prestigious institutions, they do not even know about this. And they often view like IMGs as like some 0.2% of like minority of physicians somewhere. They don't realize the magnitude. The other thing is institutional support for visas. Like Dr. Choueiri was mentioning, at the end, it's always one or two people in some office at every institution deciding the fate of all of the international physicians or researchers working at that particular institution. So like a proper streamlined platform that makes the whole visa process easier, at least at every institution, and makes it standardized. And so that the visa thing doesn't become a hurdle for well-qualified physicians or researchers to reach where they should be in their careers.
Ziad, yeah, go on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So all of these, I guess, research, visa issues, all of this together.
Ziad, in your own words, solutions, and I want to make sure we plug in the Twitter handle at IMG Oncologist, but please, any thoughts or solutions?
Yeah, echoing Ayesha first, and thank you for the plug. I think part of it, and I'm the sort of our initiative, IMG underscore oncologist on Twitter, is sort of part of that advocacy effort that Ayesha mentions. I think being visible and sort of having a united sort of a united front to be able to make the case that IMGs are playing an important role, whether through research or through clinical care, and that that they are playing an important role. So I think that is part of it, and I hope that your followers will follow us on Twitter so that we can amplify that message. I think the second one is education, and I'll allow myself to give another plug, and that means education both for the sort of leadership as well as for sort of people who are applying. And so in that effort, we're organizing a webinar coming up soon, November 7th, with an immigration lawyer to talk about a lot of these issues. And so hopefully that will be the first of many webinars to promote education in this space. And I think the third one is, in addition to just advocacy and trying to change minds, trying to change the structural barriers. And I do think that's probably longer term, take more time, especially if we're talking about sort of federal level or state level barriers to getting IMGs involved. I think those are more involved processes, but definitely that will give us the biggest bang for our buck. And that is primarily funding mechanisms, both at the residency level, at the fellowship level, at the sort of independent career level, trying to remove barriers that don't allow certain folks to get funding. And I think those three, the combination of those three will bring us a long way.
Tarek.
I mean, everybody has already voiced incredible thoughts. I think for me, it's just have an open mind and be holistic in your approach. Like, and it's easy to say minimize bias, minimize discrimination, like no matter who it is against. But really, it starts from maybe one person to change one department, to change one institution, and then to change a whole culture. Inclusivity, giving people a chance. I think we don't even need to talk about IMGs. We like look at this incredible group of people here and many others in organizations and institutions, in academic research, in leadership. Like no matter how you look, you always find an IMG who's really accomplished so much and real role models. And I think, as Ayesha had said, to give that person the chance to reach that potential, the momentum starts from their early careers. And so, I guess my message is be that person that, gives these folks the chance to shine and become incredibly successful and accomplished individuals.
Nasli?
I'll echo what everyone had said. I would perhaps add that maybe we could try to involve large national associations in medical oncology or hematology. Actually, ASCO held a few roundtable discussions regarding finding research positions before residency, before fellowship, during the ASCO 2022 meeting this year. Perhaps we may try to expand on that a little bit, try to bring the visa discussions in those fronts as well. And, you know, as Tarek mentioned, that 30% of the ASCO members are probably IMGs too. If those are this is the percentage of the oncologists in the United States. So 30% of the ASCO members are IMGs as well. So that is a relevant topic to at least 1/3 of the population, most likely to all of the oncology population. So try to involve large associations in that would probably be helpful. I'll probably add one more thing. Most of the IMGs interested in medical oncology, they go through these like research years before residency. I do believe that IMGs are attracted into the research opportunities in the United States. I think that the reason to come to the United States is not just to practice medicine, also involved in research, especially in aspiring hematologists, oncologists, IMGs. So most of us, even me, my mentors, everyone get emails from IMGs looking for research opportunities. I think trying to circle them around, trying to find a place for those people, trying to learn more research would also be something to add in that list too.
Tony, I wanted to bring all of this together in terms of proposed solutions after you heard everything. I just have two comments before you give us some, one is just a thought. I love the IMG oncologist. I follow the Twitter feed and I love it. One possibility is to consider taking away the oncologists out of it. There are IMGs cardiology, IMG other specialties, and I suspect, although I have zero data, that it's not really unique to oncology. We're obviously selfish, we're all oncologists, but I do think the problem is likely beyond oncology. And number two, I really loved Ziad was mentioning the webinar that with the lawyer, which is great. And I saw that it's actually on my calendar. I actually wonder, Tony, whether there's an opportunity to do an annual conference one day for IMGs in oncology, like an annual event that we could do it like, any thoughts? I mean, I love that we're raising awareness, but I feel that we need to start making progress in the next couple of years. So take us home.
I think this issue has been for decades and decades since the ABIM started. So I don't think things can change overnight. We haven't reached the tipping point. That's Malcolm Gladwell's famous book. But we may reach it soon. I think we would like to start by IMG oncologists because that's what we know. Learn from good and less good practices and then see what happens. I think a lot of folks want to team up with us. And I think the biggest thing here and the biggest picture is if we're all moving like the six of us to the greatest country on earth, why do you want to decrease the pool, the denominator? It doesn't make any sense. It's silly. So when I start a conversation, I don't think things are gonna change overnight, but it's good to raise awareness first, even if it's gonna take some time. It's good to gather data. It's good, like Dr. Butt and others, gather scientific data and put it there. So then the person that gave her, whoever they are, that nasty comment, but this is the data. I mean, you could not believe in the data, but then that's not science. and you put them in their place. And I think it's a good start. You know, no one likes to hear someone showing off that their program doesn't have an IMG. Therefore, that's a good thing. You know, that's not good. That's not American.
You know, I'll tell you a story that preceded all of you. It will be maybe nice. I'll have you actually reflect on it, and then maybe we need to wrap up because I have enough research to tell you that people don't like to listen more than an hour. But I do think this topic, it's impossible to cover in 1 hour. When I was an intern, I forgot, there was some legislation going on or something. It was 1996. I was actually a second-year resident at the time. My internship was 95. And there was something proposed by either the AMA or something, I remember, to minimize the number of IMGs because there was a thought that they actually are taking the job opportunities from American graduates. So my claim of fame was CNN had CNN, and it aired on ABC. There was a reporter that the reason they came into Loyola University as my residency is because there were 3 IMGs out of 40 categorical people, and I was one of them. And they interviewed me, and one of the questions literally was, and they interviewed the American grad as well. And they said, how do you feel that there are people out there who are American graduates that they are saying that you're taking their jobs? I'm not saying I'm sophisticated now, but I was like a lowly intern, had no idea how to answer this to the reporter. Like I didn't know what to say, but there was a perception, and maybe there's a perception today that the 6 of us have taken American jobs.
No, we're American.
No,
We're not
before
taking-
I wasn't
that's-
American. I wasn't
Yeah,
American
no,
at the
that's
time.
but it is the wrong because if you are a sick person, you really want the
Yeah.
best people to take care of you, and maybe one day the best people will be outside the US, sadly, if you continue this narrow-minded, silly, un-American mentality. That's as simply as that.
Well, this was really, first of all, congratulations on starting the research. Everybody has to follow IMG_oncologist. And is there anything that we did not cover that we should really make sure our listeners go home with?
No, Shadi.
We addressed
you.
everything? Okay, well, I really appreciate it. I really want to thank you, and I'm hoping that the next time we meet, we have made significant progress because of your work, your dedication, and your continued research.